There's so many little details in a contract and little things that might get negotiated differently, and it could change.
The biggest thing that I see miss is a lease not getting sent in to the closing attorney, and even though it's at the bottom of the contract that the lease needs to be transferred, security deposit needs to be transferred. Sometimes the closing attorney just doesn't ask.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Bros. My name's Todd.
My name's
Jordan. Hey, he's looking at you. You gotta go with the look.
We should have this down by now.
We should.
It's sad that we can't hit it, but
My name's Rob.
And my name's Jordan.
it just goes to prove we're doing the beginning series today, and it just goes to prove that we still are beginners ourselves
Yeah,
at this
true.
podcast thing. So, it is fun. This journey's been really fun, in the way of helping others, and I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback about this beginner series. There's a lot of different nuances to the transaction process, and we actually explain that. You can talk through the clients, but sometimes like sitting down and really understanding that portion of the process is very helpful. So today we are talking about the kind of final steps. So we got through inspections and kind of how to work through addendums, how to work through the sales contract. And today we're talking about that final step, getting it signed, lending, what that all looks like, how your agent helps get it to close, and looking at, the HUDs, Alta, they're all kind of the same thing, basic closing statement. So take it away, Rob. What I like sending closing statements to you because I'll figure it out. I'll look through it and I'm like, I think we're good. And I'll send it to you. And you always like catch something. I'm like, dang it.
There's almost always something to catch, in my opinion. You sent me one the other day where I was like, this looks good. Like they got it, everything. Because there's so many little details in a contract and little things that might get negotiated differently that you want to be sure, and it could change from the original contract via some type of repair addendum or appraisal shortfall renegotiation. There's all these things that can happen that have to be reflected in that final HUD. And, somebody might have not sent a piece of paperwork to the attorney.
Happens all the time.
And then it's not on there, and you have to, it's your job as an agent, but it's also your job as a buyer or seller to be sure everything is right. And I think sometimes closing attorneys are in a rush, especially like in a busy season. They may not get you that HUD until the day before or
the morning of. You
really want to set a timer for 10 minutes and spend it looking through to make sure everything's right.
No one's going to care about your stuff more than you care about your stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it comes back to property managers. It comes back to, buying a transaction as good as a realtor as I am. Mm-hmm. Like that buyer, that seller still cares about it more than I do. Mm-hmm. That's just human nature. And so, our job is to set people up for success and know those things. But ultimately, as it's kind of comes back to the, where does the buck stop? Who takes ownership of your own life? And ultimately, like I take personal responsibility for the end thing. And as a buyer or seller, you should as well. So understanding what you're looking at. And if you don't understand it, ask your agent and say, help me understand this point. I bought bourbon a long time ago. And my agent actually, we were sitting down to closing, which should have happened before, but it was fine. And there was like $1,000 difference of something that wasn't like lined up correctly. And she caught it. She's like, oh no, this needs to be changed. And attorney changed it real quick. And there's $1,000 more in my bank account because she caught something. So it's pretty important.
Very important.
There's been a handful of times at closing where both parties are at the closing and I'm just seeing the HUD because they didn't have it until the last minute. And I see something and I say on my, of course it's helping my client, but I say like, this is wrong. And everyone's kind of like mid-signing. They're kind of like, what do you mean? I was like, this is $325 right here. That's not in the contract. It doesn't say it should go that way. And everyone's kind of like, it's like quiet for a
It's
while.
like awkward. You want to get all the
Everybody's got to go back and reprint all
The
this
attorney's got
paper.
to reprint the paperwork. Like everyone's got to adjust things, but that's being able to read through that is valuable. I mean, it's money in your pocket or your client's pocket.
I think the biggest thing that I've seen in the transactions that I've done, especially just being investor focused, like the biggest thing that gets missed, and sometimes it's on us as agents or the seller's agent or whatever, but the biggest thing that I see missed is a lease not getting sent in to the closing attorney. And even though it's at the bottom of the contract that the lease needs to be transferred, security deposit needs to be transferred. Sometimes the closing attorney just doesn't ask. They just don't go to the bottom of the contract, or they're just in a hurry and they're got a copy and paste kind of thing going on. But sometimes they forget that lease, and if you don't catch it, then you just lost out on a couple grand, depending on how important the house is.
Well, so you didn't lose out on it.
Well,
actually, because you can take that HUD and you turn it into the property manager, and you are due those rents.
Correct.
That said, it's a lot harder to get them.
I'm going through one right now.
Yeah,
it's
a lot harder to get them.
They're having to pull together. They had to talk to a lawyer and all this because they're due it.
Yeah.
But it's like, is the seller going to give it to you? If it's a good seller,
they will.
They should.
And they should, and they will. But you're right. And typically, if it's a property manager who controls the rents,
Professional.
Yeah, professional.
Yeah,
they're going to take care of it.
Yeah.
But if it's a personal person, So, and I do get a lot of people who don't put that in the contract for tenant occupied properties.
Really.
And from a seller standpoint, it's in the best, from the buyer standpoint, it's in their best interest to put it on the contract.
100%, yeah.
From the seller point, it's a 50-50. It's owed anyway.
Yeah.
So I usually just leave it if that agent's not requesting. But a good agent will request that the deposit and the prorated rents are transferred in the purchase of the property.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's the seller's job to go get their prorated rents for the remainder of the time that they owned it.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree with that, but you are due to owe those things.
Sometimes,
but getting them is another thing.
Generally, if it's just property manager to property manager, it's pretty easy if everybody's on board. But this one was not a property manager; it was self-managed, and I literally called the agent and I was like, hey man, look, I know I think it was 2 days after Christmas. So, that's kind of chaos time when it comes to closing attorneys anyways. So I was like, hey man, look, they missed this on the HUD. Nobody sent me a HUD. I never got a HUD. It just went straight to the buyer. Never got to see it. And that wasn't on there. And it was his first house. So he didn't know what a HUD looked like. Didn't call me, didn't ask questions. Just later was like, hey, where's my $2,000? And I was like, ooh, I don't know. Let me ask. I'm sure the seller will give it to you. The seller was like, no, they missed it on the HUD. I'm not giving it to you. And I was like, all right, I guess we'll call a lawyer. I don't know if this is worth even fighting, but
small claims, man.
Yeah.
So there's another thing that's not understood: taxes. So one gets paid in the rears, one gets paid, on the front end. Which How do you that's the best thing. I've tried to explain it to clients so many times, and it's like, it's county that gets paid on the back end, right? And you pay state on the front end, or is it the other way around?
I think county's on the back end.
Okay.
I just let I still don't fully understand. I know they kind of net out roughly.
Yeah.
And the attorney can explain it, but all these years, I've never fully figured out how to.
I'm pretty sure the county's in arrears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty positive.
At the end of the day,
it's weird.
Taxes,
let's just say that.
Taxes, some of them get paid ahead of time and some of them get paid behind. And so, yes, sometimes in the per the year's calendar cycle, they sometimes balance each other out. Sometimes you end up owing a little bit of taxes. Other times you get paid back your taxes. So a good example is, you may have paid for the following year full, you owe that property tax of, we'll say $1,300. You go ahead and pay it in November. Well, if you close the property between that date and the actual next year, you're due that portion back. So you could have paid your property tax like in November, and then you close in December, and you're due back a check of $1,200 because that. But then it gets offset by the other tax,
Right.
that is due ahead of time because you haven't paid, because on the back end you're supposed to pay it.
Yeah.
So you gotta front the money for that transaction close. So it gets a little complicated, but that is one thing that I get a lot of questions of, like, where's taxes? Why is it falling this way? And it's not in our estimates either.
Yeah.
So we, anytime you're buying or selling a property, we'll provide you with what's called a net sheet. And that net sheet basically says like what you need to bring to close, or what you're getting at close on the seller side. But we don't do the tax like estimates. So sometimes people will be like, hey, my net sheet's not exactly right. And it's like, well, yeah, we're not sitting here knowing your taxes, where we're at in the calendar, close date, and figuring that all out. That's the attorney's job. And so,
I would say
it changes it.
As a buyer and looking at your closing disclosure, be aware that there's a lot of complicated words like escrow, accrual, all the ones you just mentioned, like what was that, deferral? What was the tax?
In the arrears or
arrears.
Yeah.
Like all these words that you never hear anywhere else in your life.
And it's just meant to confuse you.
Pretty much, yeah.
Mission accomplished.
So I think your job is to ask your agent, and if they don't know, be sure you ask the attorney for an explanation of anything you don't understand on there.
Yeah.
Because it is very confusing, and there's a lot of different words that once they explain it, you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But
so let's talk about out-of-state closings. And I recently had a client who brought to my attention that the attorney was requiring them to use a notary, a certified notary, which costs about $200, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on the attorney. Mm-hmm. And it's required now from this closing attorney we use frequently, which it hasn't been. So I reach out and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And basically her explanation is that it's actually the title company who's requiring these now. And there's been so much fraud as of late that it's just a new policy that you have to have a certified, notary print the papers, take them to you, sign it, notarize it, and they take them back and file it for you. So it's a $200 fee now that we have to let all of our out-of-state, people we work with, let them know about it in the net sheet. But I just think it's interesting because if you didn't know that before, like, you're getting frustrated, but like if I can pre-explain that, understand, it's like, okay, well, I get it now. Yeah. This is the cost of doing business out of state, basically. Mm-hmm. So what are some other things that have changed in the closing structure over time that kind of just the playing field, I think, is always kind of evolving a little bit?
When I started, we did a lot more both buyer and seller in the room closings. And some people, I mean, that still happens a lot, but I would say the majority now a lot of them are going to, maybe not the majority, but a lot more are, one comes in and signs now, one comes in and signs later, or one's not even coming in, it's a mail away.
Yeah.
There's just, I think there's a real increase in separate signings.
I'd agree. COVID I think, did that a little bit. And then people in general are like, there is a moment, especially when you're closing a transaction, there's a buyer and seller, and like there's just time when the attorney's doing their job and they're like, all right, I'm going to patch out and go get us all copied. And you're like, all right, you used to own the house, now I own the house. So anyway, how about them Bulls?
How about them Birmingham Stallions?
It's like moments you got to fill, like as a realtor, you got to fill the gaps. It's kind of a little awkward, but I think sometimes schedules, COVID, all that kind of stuff has kind of changed up.
Oh yeah,
up that as well. I think too, like the closing attorney, like asking who's doing the closing is important. We've had a lot of clients we work with regularly, they request certain closing attorneys.
Yep.
and just because they've had good experiences and then poor experiences with other, and say, hey, let's use the guy we used or the girl we used before. So, knowing who is doing the closing, and if you have a preference, communicating that to your agents is super helpful.
And being in the state of Alabama, this probably needs to be said too, that buyers can pick the closing attorney if they want to.
If they want to.
And the seller doesn't have to continue with the transaction if they don't want to, if they don't want to close with that person. I know we've got a couple hedge funds that only use certain people, and the buyer can say, okay, I don't want to use them. The seller can say, okay, then this is, I guess, isn't going to work, being what it is. But in Alabama, the buyer is allowed to pick who they want as a closing attorney.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I've worked with a fund and they only use a certain title and closing attorney.
Yep.
But it's stated on the front end. And so basically the seller still is controlling that environment by not accepting the contract.
Correct, yeah.
But, not moving forward. So even if the buyer can choose it, the seller still has power to say, well, we just won't move forward.
Yeah, it's my property. I mean, it's fine. We just won't do this.
Yeah. So you can also pull. So I've had a situation where they pull title as well. So something that people don't maybe understand is title and the closing attorney are separate entities. And the closing attorney often is the one who asks for title. They already have a title company they work with. And so they just automatically, but you can actually say, I want to work with this attorney and a totally separate title company.
Yeah.
And then that attorney has to go to this other title company.
Correct. Yeah.
And vice versa. You can say, as a buyer, you have a title policy that the, lender does. You can say, hey, I want this different title policy. Now, if this seller is like, no, we do title and closing, this is how it's going to go. You just have to buy an additional title policy.
Yeah.
But you can.
You can. Yeah, that's good. That's the good thing about Alabama is you can do whatever you want to do. It's just be prepared for whatever the consequences are. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man, that's funny.
So you've closed, and then you're off and running with your property. You've got to get utilities changed over.
It's just easy from there, and it's all cash flow.
Yeah, cash flow. Passive.
They say there's 2 great days owning rental properties. One of them is the day you buy it.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Yeah. Second day is when you sell it and you get all the money back.
Yeah.
So getting utilities turned on. What else?
Communicating with a property manager or a contractor if you are needing to have work done or switch over leases, tenant issues, all that kind of stuff.
Getting the keys, yeah.
There's kind of like a checklist of other stuff post-closing that needs to be done that when you're basking in that like glory of buying the property, you might forget. If you're buying one to live in, getting the homestead exemption filed is really important.
Yep.
There are some attorneys that'll do that for you, but I've realized there's also some attorneys that will not do that for you.
Yes.
I don't know what makes it so difficult that some will do it and some won't, but I guess it's just one of them things.
Yeah. The homestead taxes basically is you are allowed a discount, we'll call it, on your primary residence.
Yeah.
And so you have to file for it, especially. You have to file for it no matter what on transfer property. But the thing that's interesting is if it was owner occupied before, then on that transfer of the HUD and all those taxes, it's going to stay in that space of being not a higher tax bracket. They're not going to homestead it to put higher taxes on the HUD.
Yep.
But if you don't file yourself on your behalf, then they will go up the next year and you're up a river. But if you buy an unoccupied property that was like tenant occupied before, it's already non-homesteaded.
Yeah, you got a little refund coming.
The taxes, you don't have a refund coming.
No, you don't have a refund coming. You'll owe less.
You owe less the next year.
Correct.
But that current year, you can't reset it.
Yeah.
So that the taxes are, and we were actually working on some closings in October, and I was getting really pushed, which is totally understandable, because that is the time when you can file homestead and still get it for the next tax year.
Oh, yeah.
And they were like, we got to get this thing closed, because if we don't, I think the difference was like almost $1,000. It was significant on this property. And they were pushing because they were like, if we don't close this in the next like 5 days, we're going to miss the tax exemption. And for a whole year, on the HUD and all that, it's non-homestead.
You can, I think you can actually do it up until December 31st.
Oh, really?
The only reason I know that is because I didn't file for my own homestead exemption. And when I went to pay taxes on December 31st, I was like, so can I do homestead exemption? And she was like, yeah, but today's the last day to do that. So
you lucked out, buddy.
Yeah, thank God. She wasn't very happy with me. I don't know what she had to do on her end of the computer, or if she's just a government employee and just not happy with life. But she was just like, the big bubble gum. It's like, okay, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I just want to pay my money and leave, please.
How much did it save you?
I don't know because it never swapped over.
Oh, okay.
So I have no idea.
Okay.
But I mean, I think, probably would have been an extra, probably about $2,000.
So it was already homesteaded before.
It was already homesteaded before, yeah. And that maybe is different if you're going from tenant occupied to your personal, maybe. Right. But the lady told me, she was like, as long as you do it by December 31st of the year that you closed,
right,
calendar year, then you're okay for the upcoming year.
And also to point out, like you were talking about utilities on or lease, if you buy a tenant occupied property, if you're buying your personal residence or you're buying a property that you're renovating to turn into an investment property, all those exits have probably slightly different things you need to do to get the project up and running or to move in. So that's worth having a conversation of like, or thinking through those steps that like in my homesteading, if it's tenant occupied, that's not even an issue. So that's super helpful. But then from there, just refer me as an agent.
Yeah. Easy peasy.
That's the last thing I want you to do, right?
Good Google review.
A little Google review.
That'd be nice.
Don't forget to review your agent on Google. 5 stars.
Yeah, exactly. So, but hopefully it's helpful to talk through that process. It is the last, portion of the transaction that is, it is kind of buttoning up all of those, loose ends and making sure, like I said, a lot of times the attorneys, some stuff gets agreed upon and signed, but then gets, lost in the mix for the attorneys. They get the initial file, and then from there, they're like, oh, there's an additional addendum. It's like, yeah, I sent it to you, but they just don't pull it because they're like, oh, here's the contract. We're all good.
Yeah.
And they weren't privy. So sometimes it's really worth, and a good agent will like, hey, I'm really sending this. Make sure it's on the HUD. Just clarify with it so you can avoid that. But
they do have something, and I don't even know, I've never heard of it before, but one of the lenders for one of my clients had reached out to the closing attorney that we use because there was an error when they were filing the deed, and it was called a scrivener's error. And the wording that they put together sounded so official, and you see scrivener, and you're like, I don't know what that word is. It sounds like I'm going to jail for a long time, Yeah. It's like, please tell me what this is. Coming to find out, it just means that they misspelled a word in there. And they had to make it sound terrifying. And he's like, yeah, no problem. It's right here. Boom, retype it, and we're fixed.
That's funny.
It's like, my God in heaven.
We actually had a transaction where the title was messed up. And I had to go back to, we were closing with a different attorney, but I had to go back to the one who issued the policy from before. And they basically had to go clear it up. And it took an extra month and a half because there was just complications. They had to get certain people to sign. And it just was like this property was sold 3 years before and when all the issues were there.
Yeah.
And so go back to people that you're like, hey, you signed on this property 3 years ago, but I also need you to sign again. It was just complicated. But they got it all cleared up. And that's where title policies really help because basically the current seller had a title policy and said, well, the title screwed up. So the new attorney and the new title company said, hey, we're looking at this title. It's jacked up. The old attorney and the old title company had to fix it. And that's what they're on the lien for. That is what you're paying the money for is you said I had a clear title.
Yeah.
This new attorney, I'd go to sell it. They're saying it's not clear. It is an issue. We sent it back and they're like, oh yeah, it is screwed up. We messed up. And they had to fix it.
Good for them.
And they did, and it took time. But that's what your title policy does. It's the lineage of that property, and that title company is certifying and ensuring that that title is truly clean and getting passed down from one person to the next. And if something gets screwed up, and oftentimes it has nothing to do with actual people coming back and saying that property's mine. It's just details work that gets kind of skewed. And
do you know how much, what like percentage wise of title insurance policies get paid out?
Oh, I don't know.
It's like 2%.
Oh,
on claims?
Yeah, on claims.
That percent of claims actually gets paid out.
Yeah, like 2%.
I
could see that. I would say that probably the majority of them, it's such a high, big payout. You know, you say you buy a $300,000 property and someone comes back and like, the title work's messed up. I still own that property.
Yeah.
They're going to figure it out for $300,000.
Yeah.
So
maybe that's what it is. I don't even know how it works.
Yeah. The title is very complicated with like theoretical legal stuff and like bundle of rights, and the ownership of property is not black and white.
Yeah. You'd think it would be, but
the goal is to try to make it very black and white, but it can get really gray with different title issues and laws. And
I had a buddy who, it wasn't a title issue, but it was a closing contract issue that had to do with, he had 2 plots of land and he was selling the house and a plot, but he was keeping the other land next to it.
Yeah.
And the closing attorney messed up and included both in the transaction. And he brought it to their attention, and they failed to fix it, kept bringing it to their attention. And then I think he just got busy, and then he circled back around on it. And it was just a huge mess.
Was it in writing? I'm hoping it was in
writing.
Yeah,
it was all in writing. On the front end, he had an email to that attorney saying, hey, you guys messed up on this closing.
Yeah.
And they were like, yes, we did. And then never. So it was a big issue, but it came down to, it does. But then he goes back and was trying to get it all figured out, and no one wanted to pay. No one wanted to admit that was a problem. And, you know, you're sitting looking at, I think the property probably, that additional land was worth like an extra $30,000-$40,000. And I mean, I can't honestly remember, but I think he got lawyers involved. But at some point, it's like lawyers are super expensive.
Yeah, was it worth it?
And are you going to win?
Yeah.
And so really making sure you're good on the front end is the best way.
Don't sign the paperwork
if
you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah. We're just making it really scary scenario.
Yeah. So everything could burn.
Don't do anything.
The point is double check all the paperwork.
I think that's
read
the point.
it all.
Yeah.
And if you have questions,
that's
reach
what we're
out.
here for.
Yeah. Don't rush through your closing.
100%.
Yeah. And ask the lawyers are there for that as well. So, so we talked about closings, and I need to talk about another closing. That's even sadder. So, Cash Flow Bros, this is our last episode. I know there's tears. Mark Byers, shout out to Mark Byers, our one faithful listener.
Yeah. Well, I listened to his episode. I didn't get one shout out. Not one.
So, you know, Rob, you got some news to share.
Yeah.
Some life updates.
Yeah.
Talk it through.
Yeah, so it's been in the works for a while, and I mean, you guys have kind of known for a long time, but we are actually under contract to sell our house here in Birmingham, and we're building a house in Lakewood Ranch, Florida, which is between Sarasota and Tampa.
It's a lot further than Hoover.
I think it is. Yes. Yeah.
And so we're transitioning our business, and really through the end of the school year, over the next 3 months, I'm going to be spending a good bit of time down there getting things going. I'm really doing pretty much the same thing there that I have done here for the last 7 years: real estate entrepreneurship, brokerage, buying and selling real estate. I'm going to be doing more on the commercial investment side there, and enjoying the beach, Disney World.
Tan Rob's
So
coming back.
The things
My
I don't
tan is going to be
put back together.
significantly better.
Enjoying Disney World. No.
So yeah, that's kind of the move that we're making, and it's definitely it was a really hard decision because the last 7 years of doing real estate in Birmingham has been amazing. I've gotten to know some incredible people. Working with y'all has been really life-changing. I've learned so much. We've had so many good times. We created this show, which has been really great. And it's just been an incredible kind of phase of life. And I'm looking forward to, I think the thing that's calling out is adventure. And I think that's something that I need in my life. I think probably everyone does. And so it's kind of a new adventure. I'm really excited to get going on it and, still maintain the relationships that I've built here in Birmingham and all the wonderful people. We'll still be back regularly.
Yeah.
But it's definitely exciting. I like that I've got a long runway to kind of unwind things, let people know what I'm doing, kind of tell them thank you for the incredible help, all the vendors that we have. There's so many people that whatever success I've had over the last 7 years is zero. I mean, maybe not zero, but it's 100%, 99% other people's efforts and, willingness to work with me and help me. And so I'm very thankful for all that.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, when you were talking about it, you were like, it's been a very difficult decision, and I was hoping that you would say, because I have to leave you and Jordan, and you didn't say that.
Yeah, that's okay, man. You get used to being let down.
But no, we like I said, it's been a really great partnership, and Jordan and I both are super grateful for you taking us on your team and all the things that you've taught us. And we've, like I said, started the show. We really hope to, part of the show's goal and thought was like you poured into us and taught us how to build our portfolios. We were hoping that it would inspire and help others do the same for their portfolios and their investments and all that kind of stuff. And so hopefully that's what the show has been. The show is getting revamped. So we're going to start, I'm changing it, and I'll be doing interviews with basically, people that are in the community, real estate and business wide, changing the name up a little bit to Beyond Wealth and all that kind of stuff. But you can still tune in to get Birmingham specific market updates and kind of what's going on. So stay tuned. Like Cashflow Bros is changing names and changing format a little bit, but content is still being produced, which is really good. And now you have a realtor in, Tampa, Florida that can kind of help you invest in that pocket. So I'm sure that you'll be putting more updates on your socials as you progress, and I'm looking forward to seeing that journey. I think there's very key times in our lives where, like you said, the adventure, the trying, like there's always an expansion and a regression. There's seasons where you need to pull back and just kind of figure out the pieces, and then there's time to expand and risk, and and I think you're in a really good spot and super excited for this next season. So
I will say, like you said, the kind of heart of this show is to kind of give back, and just like this beginner series we've been doing, really help people who are trying to get going in the real estate world. So many people helped me, and so I'm going to continue that effort. If you are listening and you want to go back to like Rob Drummond 2017 starting,
I want the haircut.
I still have my blog, robdrum.us, and I have posts that I wrote 7 years ago I'm kind of like starting over in a new market, meeting new people, figuring out the layout. So I'm thinking of kind of cataloging that adventure the way I did the beginning of Birmingham. So you can subscribe on that website and stay tuned for what comes there. And I know Todd, with the kind of format that he's moving towards with Beyond Wealth, is going to really get some insights from lots of different experts around Birmingham on real estate, and just continue to provide a wealth of information for our listeners.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a change, and it's been a really good season. But definitely, there's still opportunities to work with Jordan and I, and and Rob down in Tampa now. So It's a really exciting time. It's hard, but someone told me, when I did a transition from moving from Colorado, and I was like, he was giving me a hard time about moving. He's like, man, you got to stay here. And I was like, man, I feel like you're not supporting me. I was like, man, it's kind of like, and he's like, that is me supporting you because I love you so much and you've done so well here. There's going to be some tension. And I think when we spend our lives well, when we give ourselves, in service to others, whenever we make a transition, there's going to be you should feel a tension. You should feel a little bit sad. You should feel that transition is difficult. It's because you spent your life well here. And I would just say that to you, like the hard part of it is the fact that you spent your life well here and built really good relationships, and people really enjoy doing life and business with you, and love your family. And so that is a good sign that it was a hard choice. If it was easy, it would mean that you didn't spend your life well when you were here. Yeah, and appreciate you a ton, man.
Yeah, I thank y'all, and thank you to all the listeners. We've had great kind of feedback on this show. Yeah, over the last half a year that we've been doing it, and
I mean, we started with our cell phones and tripods.
Now we got real mics and everything, boys.
Man. We got real cameras, got the whole nine.
So a lot of great people in the community that listen, that I always is humbling, and have loved the conversation.
Sure. All right. Well, you will be back sometimes, and we'll probably all get together and hang out.
Yeah, it's not like he's dying. So he is switching to Tommy Bahama, but he's not dead.
Yeah, he is changing his attire, and I'm not sure I'm okay with it.
I'm getting rid of every shirt that's not.
All right. He's growing the hair out too. I think he's just gonna do it.
It's gonna happen. All right. Well, appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thank y'all.
Thanks, man.